Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking something that usually feels like a total grueling chore, learning, and we're completely flipping the script on it. We're going to transform the whole act of studying into a tangible, science-backed biological protocol. Let's get right into it.
So think about your last late-night study session. You know the drill. You powered through the fatigue, chugged the coffee, skimmed the chapters, maybe even passed the test the next morning. And then, poof, gone, right? By the following week, it's honestly as if you never even read a single word. Why does that happen? Why do we forget almost everything we cram? Look, it's a remarkably common failure. But today, we're not actually going to dwell on that failure. Instead, we're focusing entirely on the biological solution.
Okay, let's dive into this. The answer to that classic cramming problem, and literally the hero of our story today, is neuroplasticity. Now, this isn't just some fluffy self-help buzzword, okay? It is your brain's literal, physical ability to structurally change and store new information. It's a real, physical mechanism happening right inside your head. And the absolute best part, we can actively control it.
So how exactly do we control it? Well, there are exactly 6 biological levers. Drawing on established protocols from top neurobiologists, there are 6 precise mechanisms that you can target to literally hack your learning speed and your attention. So let's break them down.
Section 1, the biological learning machine, and reframing how we learn.
We're going to look at this whole process chronologically, starting before you even sit down at your desk. But to do this right, we need to completely reframe how we view the brain. It is not some magical sponge that just passively absorbs information. No, it's a tangible machine. Learning is a highly active physical protocol. It requires chemical reactions, electrical signals, and actual structural shifts in your neurons. I mean, you wouldn't expect a high-performance sports car to run without fuel and a spark, right? Well, your brain is exactly the same. So let's look at the first step in our timeline.
Section 2, priming the engine, the biology of alertness.
Now, what's really interesting here is that this is where your perfect learning session actually begins. Alertness is the engine of our biological machine, and you've got to get it revving before the studying even starts. Now, these aren't just your standard run-of-the-mill productivity hacks. They are chemical triggers. Neuromodulators like epinephrine, which is just adrenaline, and dopamine actually drive your baseline state of alertness. You can trigger these chemicals naturally by just timing your study sessions with your body's natural energy peaks, or you can use physical levers to jumpstart the whole system. A brief burst of high-intensity movement, maybe safe cold exposure like a super quick cold shower, or targeted caffeine intake right before learning, all of that literally floods your brain with the exact chemicals it needs to stay highly alert.
But there is a massive biological trap here that catches a lot of people: the pre-study meal. If you sit down to learn complex coding or, say, a brand new language right after eating a massive heavy lunch, you are basically setting yourself up for a terrible blood sugar crash. And that physiological crash stalls the alertness engine entirely. So you've really got to keep your meals light before learning to keep those alertness chemicals running high.
Section 3, the gateway of focus, signaling priority.
Okay, so your engine is revving. You're super alert. Now we move chronologically right into the actual during learning phase. You're at your desk, and you need to open the gateway for memory formation, which is attention. And here is exactly how you open that gateway. Step 1, switch off your notifications. Seriously, put the phone in a completely different room. Step 2, work in dedicated 25 to 90-minute single-tasking blocks. Now, why are we being so incredibly strict about this? Well, because your brain biologically requires a single, undeniably strong focus signal to trigger memory formation. If you want to force your brain to literally rewire itself, you absolutely must apply these specific single-tasking blocks.
So the crucial point here is this: multitasking signals to your brain that the information is low priority. Think about it. When you constantly bounce between writing an essay, checking a group chat, and having a video on in the background, you are physically fracturing your focus. You are biologically telling your brain, hey, you know what? None of this is actually important enough to spend precious energy structurally changing for. Multitasking literally ruins neuroplasticity. No way around it.
Section 4, friction and repetition, the neuroplasticity trigger.
I have to say, this might actually be my absolute favorite part of this whole explainer, because this is where studying gets hard, and we inevitably feel frustrated. But the science offers us this major, mind-blowing biological reframing of what our mistakes actually mean. When you're studying and you just keep getting that math problem wrong, or you just cannot remember that vocabulary word, you feel agitated, right?
But biologically, those error signals are actually releasing neuromodulators like acetylcholine and norepinephrine. That intense frustration you feel, that is literally your brain's internal monologue screaming, hey, something went wrong, I need to adjust.
I really want to let this sink in for a second. Friction is the exact moment you are primed to learn. This is a massive aha moment for so many of us. Most people hit a wall, they feel that painful frustration, and they just walk away because, well, it feels bad. But that state of heightened alertness and agitation, that is the literal neuroplasticity trigger. Do not walk away. Lean into it and push through the friction because that is the exact, precise moment the rewiring happens.
And this brilliantly illustrates our next biological pillar, repetition. It's the foundation. Every single time you recall or practice that piece of information, you physically strengthen that specific neural pathway. Moving from that initial study session to recalling it days later, and then maybe weeks later, what we call spaced repetition, signals to the brain that this knowledge is repeatedly necessary. You are physically cementing it into your long-term memory across these widening intervals.
Section 5. Sealing the memory vault. Consolidating knowledge. All right, let's take a breath and actually slow down the pacing just a bit here. We've primed the engine, focused fiercely, and pushed through the friction. Now we enter the after-learning phase. How do we lock the vault? Well, we need to talk about breaks. What is the very first thing you naturally do right after an intense study session? I know I do it. Most of us just grab our phones and immediately start scrolling social media. That is a high-input break. Instead, what you really need is a zero-input break. We're talking 10 to 20 minutes of absolutely no inputs. No scrolling, no podcasts, no reading, just what neuroscientists call non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR. Honestly, just quiet reflection. But why? Why is a zero-input break so absolutely critical immediately after learning? Well, it's because of this wildly surprising biological fact. During these specific moments of quiet rest, your brain automatically replays the newly learned material backward at incredibly fast speeds. Yeah, backward. This subconscious high-speed backward replay drastically accelerates memory consolidation. By scrolling on your phone the very second you put your pen down, you are actively interrupting your brain's automatic save function. Crazy, right?
Now, sleep is the vault. That's it. That is the undeniable, absolute truth of the biological learning machine.
Let's move on and see how this all builds together. When we look at the complete picture, it looks exactly like this. Daytime learning is strictly for acquiring information, and it only holds it in short-term storage. The actual physical transfer into long-term storage occurs during non-REM and REM sleep. This is exactly why sacrificing sleep to cram is entirely 100% counterproductive. When you pull an all-nighter, you literally stop the physical transfer of memory dead in its tracks. All that daytime friction, all that intense focus, completely wasted, just because you never locked the vault.
So there you have it. We've broken down the 6 pillars. You need alertness to start the engine, attention to open the gateway, mistakes to trigger the rewiring, repetition to cement the pathways, zero-input breaks to consolidate the data, and sleep to ultimately lock the vault. It really is a brilliant, sequential, physical protocol. So I'll leave you with this final thought and a bit of a challenge. What will you rewire your brain to learn today? You've got the biological roadmap, now get out there and go apply it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.